I want to talk today about democratization of risk. I spoke about this last year in exactly the same place actually, but I have a different take on it this year. I want to associate it with something called the 5 immutable principles of project success, which is largely common sense about how you plan and schedule a complicated or complex project. But it's some work we've been doing during the year, and I want to link that to the concept of risk, because in Safran software, we believe that risk is essential to managing any complex project or environment. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a little while, but democratization as a concept means we believe risk as a set of tools should be available to everybody, not just the risk managers. Of course, the risk managers do their own job, but for smaller projects, smaller scale projects, risk should be a technique and a set of tools which is easy to use, easy to understand, easy to deploy, and it's often not thought about like that. I want to explain what I mean, but I want to do it against the context of these 5 principles. These principles, that's me. These principles come from an ebook that we've produced during the year. We produced 2 electronic books, and they're available on our website. One is about the decommissioning of a nuclear facility at Rocky Flats in America, and it's a very interesting project, It beat its forecast timescales and costs very significantly, and I want to explain why. And it was largely due to the team that were running it who developed these 5 principles which governed the work they did, and we can all learn a little bit from that. But in particular, I want to focus on the risk aspects of what they were doing. So let me first introduce this project, and then we'll move forwards a little bit into the concept of democratization. So this is Rocky Flats in the States. It was a nuclear facility that worked between 1952 and 1992, so 40 years of nuclear power generation. By 1992, the US Department of Energy closed it down, and at that point, it was the most contaminated, the most dangerous site in all of the nuclear environment within the US. They were worried about it. In fact, it got to the point where staff on the site didn't want to turn up for work because it was recognized as being quite dangerous, quite contaminated. So they developed a project to decommission it. And the original project plan at the first pass was a 70-year project that was going to cost $36 billion. So quite a significant undertaking. I'll tell you how long it took in a little while. But these principles were developed by the team at the beginning in order to decommission this in 1992 as fast and as safely as possible. Safety was key to this. And these principles, they're pretty straightforward. They're common sense. Anybody involved in planning and scheduling here would recognize these. But what the team did was they formalized them within the Department of Energy, and then they took them down to a level of detail that we probably don't do, and perhaps should sometimes. It's quite Americanized, I'm sorry. Anybody here from America? I apologize right now because, okay, sir, I apologize, but I'm going to point out that maybe some of the language is a little Americanized sometimes. And what does done look like is one comment. In England, we might say, what does it look like when it's finished? But anyway, done is a concept that we need to get used to. And done is about, what is it that we're going to be looking at when we walk away, when we're finished? What is it? What do we want? What's the vision? And in particular, a schedule of capabilities. So this is what I mean about getting into more detail. What is the schedule of capabilities and their linked requirements that we want to walk away from? Because what is it that gives us business value? Any project is about creating business value, or should be. What are the capabilities and the requirements that will generate the business value that we want to see in 70 years when we decommission this site? Okay? And how do we get there? So, okay, you've got the plan, you've got the vision, you then need the schedule, you need the strategy. You need to start putting together a master plan to deliver that. And if it's a 70-year project, it could take you a couple of years just to develop the master plan. Then you need to resource it, and then you need to think about risks. Now, what you don't do is you do all of that first and then you think about risks. These 5 principles run concurrently. And it was very important in decommissioning this nuclear facility that risk was something they thought about on day one as they were developing the capability statement. And that's part of the lesson I want to to pass on, half of the lesson I want to pass on today. Don't ignore risk, think about it up front. Make it as important to you as duration planning, as activity planning, as cost planning. And then how do we measure progress? This is really important too, but you have to link it at this extra level of detail. Come down into the schedule of capabilities that you're looking at and decide how you're going to measure progress across your work packages to deliver the capabilities you're looking for. And if you're doing something that isn't going to deliver you a capability in a safe way, ask yourself why you're doing it. Okay? A lot of you are thinking, I've been here before, this is what I do. But the level of detail here and the emphasis on safety is really quite interesting. So I'm not going to give you the whole presentation about Rocky Flats, it's just too big. However, what does done look like? Well, it's a schedule of technical capabilities linked to requirements as a first pass, but then there's interdependencies between those capabilities that drive the value at the end of the day. What do those interdependencies look like? How do we capture them? And how do we measure effectiveness? And most importantly, everything changes. No plan stays the same, no schedule stays the same as the original plan. So how are we going to measure changes in performance, changes in delivery, and changes in ultimate capability that we're driving for? And that needs a unit of measure that needs very carefully buying into by your subcontractors, your contractors, everyone involved. And here is a great example. A guy called Robert Goddard. Anybody heard of him? I'd be really surprised, but I'm happy to recognize anybody. Sir, have you heard of him? No? Okay, all right. Robert Goddard lived in the 1880s, 90s, and he developed a plan to go to the moon. Now, back in those days, that was quite an adventure, right? Because it probably wasn't going to happen. And in fact, at some point on one of the charts, he talks about it there, talks about a balloon, right? So his technical appreciation of what would be needed to go to the moon in 1892 was probably a little stretch, right? But he developed this plan. And actually, it's looked back at now as a great example of real planning, in depth, using the 5 principles we've talked about in 1890. Okay, they didn't go to the moon, but the exercise is really quite interesting to study. And I've got one more slide for him later on. The point is, he developed a schedule of capabilities. He developed a technical requirement. He developed a unit of measure to measure performance, all about going to the moon. So, how do we get to done when we know what done looks like? Well, this is something you're all really comfortable with, okay? You develop a plan and develop a schedule. Of course, they're different things. And we tend to think about planning and scheduling as what it's all about, but actually the plan is different to the schedule. The plan is a strategy. The plan is saying, this is what done looks like, and this is where I really want to be, and these are the milestones. These are basically my strategy for getting there. The schedule then takes that strategic vision, that growth you're trying to achieve, and it turns it into actionable steps with their interdependencies, and it resources them, and it comes up with a proper tactical deployment method to achieve your plan, but it's different. Okay? So your plan might not change, but your schedule can change all the time, depending on your risk analysis, depending upon what happens in the world. Then when you've done that, you come up with this concept of accomplishments. And you look at your work packages, and you structure them vertically, and you structure them horizontally, and you work out that all those work packages are achieving something. That they are actually going to achieve something as an accomplishment that will get you to the point where you can achieve a capability. I'm not going to get any more techie than this, so don't worry. This is my worst slide, but it's important, I think, that you understand that any plan has a schedule that contains work packages that are delivered by contractors. And that all in itself is really quite something to get your head around when you're looking at the fact that work packages need to be linked interdependently, both vertically and horizontally, and every work package needs to deliver business value or a contribution to capability that will. And what they did at this nuclear facility was they got to this point, identified all the work packages over many years, and then they stood back and they took a long time to say, which of those work packages do we need? Which don't we need? Which is actually in there for no reason? What is the unit of measure that we're going to measure the effectiveness of a work package against capability? And they went into that in enormous detail. It sounds really boring, but they really drilled into it. And the net effect was really quite substantial because the work packages and the plan and the schedule they started with was going to take 70 years, okay? I'll tell you in a minute how long it took. So let's talk about risk. Let's bring it back now to risk. So the fourth principle is about understanding what are the impediments to getting there. So in other words, you've got a plan, you've got your work packages, you've got your schedule. Let's actually risk analyze that. Let's look at all the risk events that might happen. Let's look at how accurate our durations are likely to be. Let's do all of the usual risk stuff. And let's come out with a probability of occurrence and see what that does to our deterministic delivery, to our capabilities and the business value we're going to unlock. This is how Robert Goddard did it. This was his master schedule. Develop a booster, develop fuel, develop spacecraft. This is 1892, right? Train the astronauts. You see how long the training took. He understood that getting to the moon wasn't really so much about technology. It was about making sure people didn't get killed on the way. And then test it. And I'm afraid that's as far as he got. That was his master plan. And he realized at that point that the technology just wasn't up to it. It's very interesting, though. If you look at the plan for the first moon landing, it took them, I don't know how long it took them to actually build the craft and get there, but it was certainly more than 10 years. If you look at that plan, though, you will see that some of the technologies they recognized they needed were not there at the time. And the plan to get to the moon the first time around involved a guess at, an estimate at, how long it would take to develop fuel in particular that would to get them there and be safe and expendable. So he wasn't actually too much out of order in designing a plan that couldn't be delivered technically. Unfortunately, he didn't make it, and the other guys did. So what does done look like? This is the Johan Sverdrup field in Norway, still being constructed. It's going to take a long time. Anybody been involved in Johan Sverdrup? Okay, someone over there. It's a major European project right now to develop this oil field. And the master plan looks like that. Now that is the master plan. That is the top of the tree of an enormous amount of planning that's going on right now. So this equates to the Robert Goddard diagram we saw a second ago. This is risk adjusted. This includes all the work packages. You could drill into any amount of this, right down into real levels of detail. And it just shows the difference between a plan at a simple level and a very complex plan that has been risk adjusted. So this is what done looks like, okay? So Rocky Flats, when they walked away from it, was an empty field, contamination-free. And in fact, the guy who presents this says, we were able to walk away, lock the gate, and chuck the keys back over the fence. Okay, so it was done. So the capability, the business value they were looking at was an empty field and no one died to get us there. Now, the plan was 70 years and $36 billion. Using those 5 principles and the risk process that we're going to look at in a little bit, they did it in 10 years and it cost them $6 billion. So very rare you find a project which is, well, it depends how you look at it. You could say that was a really successful project. You could just say that the original planners were pretty rubbish. But either way, they did it very quickly compared with what they were supposed to. And risk, that 4th principle, was absolutely key to that. So I want to try and bring this back now to, how am I doing for time? Okay, to how we can democratize risk. Because that was a complicated project, all right? And a lot of the projects we deal with are actually quite simple. We're working with an oil and gas company in Houston. And this company identified, actually 4 or 5 years ago now, that 80% of its projects were worth less than $50 million and contributed less than 20% to its portfolio value. So they had a lot of small projects, whereas the principle says 20% of their projects were worth more than 50, contributed 80% of the value. And that 20% of the project had a risk manager associated for the life of the project, was thoroughly risk analyzed, and tended to be fairly accurately planned. 80% of the projects were really useless. They really came in late. They cost a lot more than they were expected to, very hard to control, source of great embarrassment to that particular company. So they developed this concept of democratization of risk because they realized that while their planners were pretty good at planning activities, looking at durations, they were experienced guys. They knew how long things took and what they would cost. They were still deterministic. And 80% of those projects were never risk adjusted and they were always coming in late because risk happens, right? So they took this concept and they developed a very easy to use risk portfolio toolset, software toolset. But more than that, a process very easy to use risk process that they're busy rolling out to 80% of those projects. And they're trying to create a culture in that company where people just don't think that a plan is a list of activities and maybe costs. If you're lucky, you cost adjust it, right? They think about it as duration, as cost, and as risk. And they wouldn't think anything else. They just do it naturally. So in order to do that, you need to dispel a lot of the myths about how hard it is to do that. And you need to make it easy for people to use risk. And we're helping with that, and that's what we do. So how do we do that? I'm just going to spend a little bit of time talking about Safran now. So this is the sales bit, but it's really interesting. You'll love it. So Safran Project has been designed with exactly that concept in mind, democratization of risk. So we've been making Safran Project, which is our scheduler, for 25 years. For 25 years, we've been rolling out scheduling tools in Northern Europe. We have a product called Safran Planner, and that's quite important because Monte Carlo analysis, duration uncertainties, managing risk in an easy-to-use way is built into Safran Project. So when you're in the schedule, you can't really avoid risk adjusting that schedule. It's very easy to do. It happens while you're processing the schedule. And you're almost creating a culture through that process that encourages the use of risk and gets your schedule right. Now, Safran Project in its own right is a very, very comprehensive scheduler. It will manage Johann Sverdrup. That was a Safran report you saw. But risk is just embedded in that. Safran Planner is a lightweight tool which is available to 80% of the people that don't want the complexity of a Safran project. If I was very naughty, I'd compare this in the competitive marketplace and I would say Safran Project is a bit like P6 and Safran Planner is a bit like Microsoft Project. That's the way they're kind of positioned, but there are some big differences, but they all look and feel the same and data moves seamlessly between the two products. So we have one customer called Statoil, you've probably heard of Statoil, and they use Safran Project for complex projects, Safran Planner for little ones, but it's the same project data. So you can dip in and out with either tool depending on your role in that company. And we integrate with loads of stuff, including SAP. Important thing about Safran Project is it includes everything you need in a project controls environment to manage a schedule. We're the only company that does that. So it's not just about planning, scheduling, and risk. It's about earned value, contract management, variation, order control, and it has its own report generator built into the tool. So you don't have to drop data out into Excel to manage analytics or produce S-curves or histograms. It all happens in front of you in a risk-adjusted way inside the tool. If you want to have a look, come to our stand number 7. Okay, so this allows us within the schedule to produce tornado charts and manage uncertainties, not risk events, but in the schedule you can manage uncertainties in your duration estimates. We then have a different approach for Safran risk, called Safran Risk, and this is for the risk manager. Very easy to use, process-driven tool, which takes you through then not just duration uncertainty, but how to manage risk events, how to manage risk factors. It has weather modeling built into it, so time series data can readily be absorbed into the tool, and it analyzes down to the minute, which is very useful for transport companies, managing possessions of rail lines, all that sort of thing. You can manage risks to 60-second intervals, which when you're trying to do an awful lot in a 7-hour window when the trains don't run overnight is very, very important. And Safran Risk has the whole of Safran Project built into it. So if you buy Safran Risk, you get all of that schedule stuff I talked about included in it, which means you can risk manage to fullest extent inside the schedule while the schedule is in execution. It's very, very powerful. No one else does that. So just to summarize this a little bit about Safran, the use cases this portfolio gives us are very rich, very wide. We can do all sorts of capital projects, all sorts of maintenance, turnarounds, shutdowns, and operational maintenance projects using this very rich product set. And horizontally, that gives us an ability to manage all of the activities and the costs, but the risk. And I put risk on the top for a very good reason, because we want everybody to filter the way they think about a schedule through that risk filter. Think about how you would risk analyze and allow that schedule to move in a non-deterministic way to reflect the real world. Navantia do this. Another case study for you. Anybody heard of Navantia? Okay, some, that's good. I hadn't really expected that. This is a Spanish company, one of the largest aerospace and defense companies in Spain. Very Spanish though, very much constrained within Spain, but they build submarines for the Canadian Navy, they build ships for the Australian Navy, very much a government and defense company building things like this. Now they use Safran's tools and they have a risk view of life. The guys there, the 35 planners and schedulers and the many, many other people who touch the projects every day, they think about risk. They use those facilities. And their planning and their execution of these large government projects is first class. It runs extremely well and they have a very good record of accurate forecasting. And we believe it's because of that culture, not so much the software, but the culture of thinking about how that project is going to move with the everyday world. What's going to happen to all the variables that impact a very large defense contract. Hinkley Point. Who's heard of Hinkley Point? Okay, a few more, that's good. So at Hinkley Point, they use a risk tool, but again, most importantly, they have a risk culture, which allows them to very safely build. I've heard it said this is the largest, in terms of spend, the largest European construction project going at the moment. I don't know what the budget is, but the guy running that project is on record for saying it's the most expensive European construction project today. And it certainly is quite an impressive project. They're using Safran Risk to manage the whole of the development of that site. And we can reference them if you'd like to talk to them. Very happy to organize that. A little bit of history. Safran Risk was developed by the team that developed PertMaster. Who uses Oracle Primavera Risk Analyzer? Okay, more than don't. Okay, used to be called PertMaster. We hired the team into Safran, they developed Safran Risk. We started off with a very simple set of schedule risks a couple of years ago. We've worked up now to where we can manage full time series analysis, full risk mitigation, risk factors, and in January we'll have a cost risk environment because we realized that the whole life cycle of a capital project or a maintenance project, beginning at pre-concept stage through to execution, relies on a number of moving features. Safran Risk was really constrained to the second half of that life cycle. So it was about looking at the risks of developing the master plan and then executing it. The schedule risks. It didn't really pay much attention to the budgetary risks, the whole forecasting, and initial pre-concept and concept work that has to go on before a schedule gets fully funded. So we extended Safran Risk backwards, so it now has equivalent functionality to tools in the market like at-risk, and it will manage your cost risk right through from conceptual stage right through to termination, execution and termination. Come and have a look on our stand. No presentation is good without screenshots. I went through them quite quickly. Anybody want to see the screenshots again? No? Okay, all right. So I just want to wrap up, actually. I'm talking fast, I'm doing quite well for time, but I want to wrap up and just summarize where we are. So we talked about the 5 principles. We talked about taking a 70-year project and delivering it in 10. And we talked about the importance of risk to that process, but we also talked about what does done look like? What is the schedule of capabilities, the schedule of assumptions we didn't talk about that would deliver the business value at the end of the day, and how you manage that done in a real world by using risk against resources, costs, and schedule durations. So, I'm afraid I finished rather early. I hope that's all right, but why not take a look? Go on the Safran website, pick off these free ebooks. That means I'll get your email addresses and I'll plague you forever. Trying to sell you stuff, it doesn't mean that at all. You can get on there quite anonymously, pull off an ebook and read about some of the things I've talked about. Okay, do we have any questions? Madam.
In your presentation, you talked about tornado charts, right? And I
Yes.
just want to find out how you use that within your company.
How we use
project?
tornado charts?
Yeah.
Well, we don't use them ourselves within my company. We just produce software that enables you to. We have a range of, so Safran Risk and Safran Project will both produce tornado charts for you, and they're pretty classic tornado charts. So it's a good question, actually. Let me expand on the answer a little bit. So you can use our tools to produce the normal tornado chart, so any range of probabilities against any outcomes and so on. However, we realize that you want to go a bit further than that, usually in your risk analysis. So as well as tornado charts, we produce something called, a sensitivity analysis, for example. So the sensitivity analysis in our tool is very easy to use, but it will let you rerun that chart effectively against any range of outcomes and probabilities very quickly, and then plot one tornado chart. I'm maybe not explaining this accurately, but one set of outcomes against another, against a range of probabilities on the same graph. So you can see what mitigating certain types of risk will do to a given probability level against a range of outcomes. I encourage you all to come and have a look at our tornado charts and the sensitivity charts and critical path analysis that come from managing the mitigation of those risks on the Stand 7, where there's an expert who knows more what he's talking about.
The presentation was very good. Thanks. My question is about, you have explained about how the risk works, but you have not explained about what are the inputs required for your software to get the results of risk management, everything. Inputs, what you need to put into the software to get out the output.
That's a good question. Yeah. Okay, so I've explained how the software helps analyze risks, but where does the data come from? Is that what you're saying? Where do you get the risk inputs from? Yeah, okay. So, well, there's a range of places you can get risk inputs to the Safran software, going from typing them in to pulling them in from a range of other tools. So we integrate with ARM, we integrate with other qualitative risk tools. I should explain that our analysis is purely quantitative, so we look at the impact quantitatively on the schedule. So qualitative risks that need to be quantified, you would pull in from a risk management tool like ARM, Excel, or you can take them from Primavera or Microsoft Project, or there's a whole range of tools, SAP. All of those products and tools we would sweep up and take into our risk analysis tool.
It's a database type.
Yes. So we have our tool is supported by a database of risk. We have a risk register, and in that risk register you would put those risks, and then you would analyze them. But we do have a risk register, but it's a quantitative risk register, not a qualitative one.
Qualitative.
Yeah.
How about qualitative? Qualitative risk?
We don't do qualitative risks. So we work with other tools that do. Our strategy, okay, that's a good question. Let me explain. Our strategy in Safran is to be the best in the world at managing the schedule, okay? By which I mean numerically, quantitatively, the way the schedule moves, the way it reacts to risk, the way earned value reacts to all sorts of things. We want to be in control of that environment. There are other tools that do qualitative risks, but if you can't take a risk and measure its impact on a schedule, then we don't do that. So we would take risk out of ARM, which are purely qualitative, and we would encourage you to analyze the impact on duration, cost, anything in that schedule, and we would model that for you very fast and very effectively. But we prefer not to get involved in the qualitative risk environment. We integrate with ARM, we integrate with many other tools. So, use the microphone, please.
You will do the first qualitative analysis, then you go for a qualitative analysis. What is the process? You understand you are doing? Because the first thing, what I know about that is we just do the qualitative analysis, then we go for a quantitative analysis so that it will show the impact, how does it works on it.
Yes.
And how about the skills? Is it been defined in the program itself, or we have to design? Because every company and every risk identifier has their own level of scale in that one.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
So does your software states that?
Okay, so there's two questions there really. So to answer the first question, we don't do qualitative risks, but we absolutely suggest and encourage in the conceptual stage of any project, as soon as you get any sort of schedule emerging from your conceptual work, you start to quantitatively analyze that against risk. You may have done some qualitative work beforehand. You need to take those risks and measure them into the schedule, right? In terms of scale, that is entirely up to you. The product that I'm talking about will scale to any degree. So there is a question at the back there, I think.
The question is, would Safran Risk replace typical scheduling tools like P6?
Well, that's a very good question. So because it includes Safran Project, and Safran Project is equivalent to P6, you can take Safran Risk and you can replace P6 and the risk analyzer with that. Yes, we have customers that have done that. But to be strictly accurate, you're not replacing P6 with Safran Risk. You're replacing Safran Project into the P6 scheduling world. But it happens to be included within the risk tool. But you can go into the risk tool and be in the world of Safran Project and just not worry about the risk side. Once you're in there, that envelope called Safran Project, you're in our scheduling environment. The fact that it integrates with Safran Risk is something you may wish to exploit, but you don't have to. So Safran Project plus Safran Risk is a direct competitor of P6 and Oracle's Risk Analyzer, yes. And we have plenty of people replacing or using that instead. Does that answer the question?
It does. Just a follow-up question on that. How easy is it to do an integrated cost and schedule using Safran Risk?
How easy is it
to do an integrated cost and schedule analysis using Safran Risk?
I think it's very easy. It depends. I mean, the concept of integration almost goes away with Safran because everything is happening within that schedule and within the risk environment for both cost and duration at the same time. You can turn one off, but people don't, so it is, the concept of integration doesn't really exist, it's just all there working together. Okay?
My question is really about the compatibility of your software. You were talking about you've got project and planner and you use the comparable between P6 and MSP, and it's
yes.
More to say, does your software allow you to import data sets or plans, schedules into your software from these other formats? Is it completely seamless or do you end up?
Yeah, okay, good. It's a good question. I should have asked that myself, thank you. So, yes, we have very well tested integration actually to those two formats as well as Excel. So XER and Microsoft, you can take schedules out of those, both those products, put them straight into Safran. By the way, Safran Project and Planner is actually the same product. It's just we've turned bits off in Planner to make it lighter weight. So it is the same product. So you can take them in. When you do, you get a Gantt chart which shows you the P6 bars and the Safran bars, one on top of the other for the whole project, if you want to look at the whole project. And so you can manually, visually check there's been no change. People don't often do that after the first couple of passes because very, very rare there's any difference. But we give you the ability just to look. So to answer your question, yeah, our customers do that all the time and it's a seamless, very easy to use process. You can also put it back into the, so we have Statoil, for example, insist on using Safran, but they have plenty of contractors using P6. So Statoil have a whole master plan where they take XCR files in, roll them all up in Safran, produce the master plan, make decisions, roll them back down and push them back out in XCR. Works fine.
I saw you have an EVM module inside.
Which module?
Earned value management module. Do you also integrate percentage schedules in the earned value management module?
Yes, I'm not an expert on EVM. There is a guy on the stand who is, actually, and I would encourage you to talk to him. But our EVM module is written to the US government standards, and it produces all the usual reports and whatever they require. I'm sorry, I don't know a lot about EVM, but
okay.
Happy to show it to you with Steinar on the stand.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
So, hi. I would imagine you have some standard reports that this will produce.
Yep.
Is there an ability to, create reports and kind of customize these?
Yes, of course. So that's another good question, actually. So we do have a whole report generator inside Safran. That comes with a lot of standard reports, I don't know, 60, 70, or something like that. And in fact, on the stand, we've got a pack of the main reports that are produced that you can look at. However, on top of that, it's a report generator. So it's quite easy to get in there, and there's a lot of tick boxes and things to construct your own report very quickly and easily. S-curves, bar charts, whatever you want to see, it's quite quick to do. Yes, come and have a look. Okay, I think we should, unless there's any burning questions, let's call it a day there. Thank you very much for your time, everybody. Love to see you on the stand.